Alright, so let's get started tonight. Last week we are talking about obedience. So we have talked about two kinds of obedience so far. Who remembers week 1? Parental obedience. That was week 2. Parental obedience was week 2. What was week 1? Yes, yes. So we talked about God's authority. We talked about parents' authority. And now we're going to ask ourselves, by looking at 1 Samuel chapter 15, can we really have an option of obeying God? Is obedience really optional? Hard question. An option is an act of choosing. Choice, the freedom to choose, according to Webster. If I have, and I don't, but let's just say I have an extensive educational background, if I have a lot of different work experience in my life, okay, my career options would probably be more numerous than they would be otherwise. Okay? Greater preparation oftentimes means greater opportunity, and also it means more choices. If I were to go purchase a new car, I would have a wide range of different vehicles that I could choose from. Okay? I could choose from a number of different makes and models. I could maybe even choose from cars that have different engine sizes, maybe even different features or comforts like heated seats, navigation, all sorts of cool stuff in there. Maybe a TV in the back seat for my kids, all that kind of stuff, right? I can choose to drive home the most basic car that they make, or I could choose to go with a luxury brand with all sorts of crazy things in it that you don't even have to basically even drive the car anymore, right? It just drives it for you, more or less. My options, however, are limited only by my ability to be able to fork over the cash for this particular car, right? But the fact of the matter is that your life, my life, we all have lives full of choices every single day. In fact, you, whether you realize it or not, make countless decisions every single day. Now here's the reality. What you choose to wear today may not be a life-changing decision. Maybe it is. Maybe it's not. But, however, there are many things in life that I would say should not be considered optional. Why do I say that they are not considered optional? For instance, I could tell you guys, I am going to choose to not eat food for the next 3 months. Okay? Now here's the thing. I can choose to do that, but it is unlikely that I will remain alive. Okay? So if you think about it, that's not really an option. In the same token, if I were to choose to say, you know what, I'm just not going to pay any more taxes. But if I value my good name, if I value my personal freedom, okay, by not paying taxes is not really an option that I can afford to do. Some things in life are simply not optional. But too often in our world, and especially here in the U.S., we tend to view almost everything as optional. It's an either-or situation, right? But there are some things in life not optional. Why do I say that? Our obedience to God should not be an optional thing. Our obedience to God should not be an optional thing. Oh, certainly, you can sit here and say, oh, God, oh, Kyle, you know what? I can choose to disobey God. You are right. You can choose to not obey God. But that is only an option if we don't place much importance on the will of God, on the blessings of God, and on the closeness that we desire to have with Him. Tonight I want you to consider a man that lived through, or basically lived as though obeying God was optional. The attitude and the rebellion behind it was his very downfall. The man was the first king of Israel, Saul. Okay? We will see in the course of tonight not only the disastrous results of Saul's lack of obedience, but also some pitfalls for us as Christians to really avoid. So, what happened to Saul? An attitude of optional obedience led to Saul's disobedience. Basically, we see in 1 Samuel 15, verse 1, Samuel told Saul "The Lord sent me to anoint you king over his people Israel. Now listen to the words of the Lord." So Samuel here, his reminder to Saul was basically this: Saul, it was God who made you king over Israel. It was God who did that. Because of that, you are to obey his commands. He made you king. That means you need to obey him. The same thing can be said about us, God's children, today. Just as God did not make Saul king of Israel because of his own qualities, because of how good of a guy he was, neither are we, as God's children today, on the basis of any personal merits of our own. It's nothing that we have done to earn God's favor in our life. Our sins have been forgiven simply because of the marvelous grace of God. Ephesians 2:8-9. The Apostle Paul further adds this. He says in 1 Corinthians 6:19, "You are not your own, for you are bought with a price. Therefore glorify God in your body, in your spirit, which are God's." To state Paul's conclusion simply here, it is that God has a right, that's right, God has a right to expect obedience, to expect honor, to expect respect from those who he has purchased with the blood that he paid of his son Jesus. In fact, a gentleman by the name of Peter Forsyth, I think, was right when he said this. He said, "The first duty of every soul is to find not its freedom, but its master." Not its freedom, but its master. That's our duty, is to find our master, not our freedom. The second thing we notice about God's command here is God's command to Saul was very clear and it was very specific. 1 Samuel 15, verse 2. "This is what the Lord of hosts says. I witnessed what the Amalekites did to the Israelites when they opposed them along the way as they were coming out of Egypt. Now go and attack the Amalekites and completely destroy everything they have. Do not spare them. Kill men and women, children and infants, oxen and sheep, camels and donkeys." Now Amalek was the grandson of Esau, Genesis 36:12. His descendants were then called Amalekites, which were basically these relentless enemies of Israel. Now when the children of Israel came out of the Egyptian bondage, the Amalekites made this really actually kind of cowardly attack upon them. And really, it was an act that prompted God to command Israel to war continually with Amalek until they were finally destroyed. Why? There were two reasons. The first one was that God knew what the Amalekites would seek to do to his people in the future. God foreknew that. The second thing is that God always repays sin. Always. God is just. Therefore, he always repays sin. Deuteronomy 7:9. "Know that Yahweh, your God, is God, the faithful God who keeps his gracious covenant loyalty for 1,000 generations with those who love him and keep his commands. But he directly pays back and destroys those who hate him. He will not hesitate to directly pay back the one who hates him." You know, I think we have a major misconception in our society today. And that is that we think that we can actually get away with our sin. We think we can get away with it. We think that we can just ignore the gorilla or the elephant in the room from our video before, right? Doesn't matter if we're getting hit with peanuts or banana peels or whatever it might be. God's word says differently. Numbers 32:23 says, "Be sure your sin will find you out." Ecclesiastes 8 verse 11. "Because the sentence against a criminal act is not carried out quickly, the heart of people is filled with the desire to commit crime. Although a sinner commits crime 100 times and prolongs his life, yet I also know it will go well with God-fearing people, for they are reverent before him. However, it will not go well with the wicked, and they will not lengthen their days like a shadow, for they are not reverent before God." So what we see next is where Saul's error was. Okay? Let's face it. At first, Saul looked to be a pretty great king. And he did obey God to a point. 1 Samuel 15:4. Then Saul summoned the troops and counted them at Talium. 200,000 foot soldiers, 10,000 men from Judah. Saul came to the city of Amalek and set up an ambush in the wadi. He warned the Kenites, "Since you showed kindness to all the Israelites when they came out of Egypt, go on and leave. Get away from the Amalekites, or I will sweep you away with them." So the Kenites withdrew from the Amalekites. Then Saul struck down the Amalekites from Havilah all the way to Shur, which is next to Egypt. So when you look at this so far, what has Saul done? He's obeyed God. So far he has. God has said, go fight Amalek, right? And Saul gathered up an army and he engaged the enemy. Check mark, obedient, right? Good job, Saul. Secondly, Saul even showed mercy to the Kenites, which was, at this time and in this kind of situation, this was nearly unheard of. Absolutely unheard of. The common practice of that day was basically to destroy a group of people who were peacefully coexisting with an enemy. Okay? If you're hanging out with an enemy of somebody and somebody else's enemy comes, and they're going to take you out. That's just how things work. Saul felt obligated to show mercy to the Kenites because they were the descendants of Moses' father-in-law Jethro. We see that in Judges 1, verse 16. But here's the problem. Saul's obedience was only partial. It was only partial. Look at verse 8, 1 Samuel 15:8. He captured Agag, king of Amalek, alive, but completely destroyed all the rest of the people with the sword. Saul and the troops spared Agag, and the best of the sheep, cattle, choice animals, as well as the young rams, and the best of everything else. They were not willing to destroy them, but they did destroy all the worthless and unwanted things. That kind of sounds like halfway, doesn't it? That wasn't really obedience. Saul only obeyed God's command to the point that it made sense to him. But we could use this guy's leverage. But these are some really nice cattle. I mean, we could get money for them. They could feed us. We could do all sorts of things. I mean, they're worth something. That doesn't make sense. Why would God really want us to destroy them? Right? So Saul figured out it was unreasonable to destroy this fine livestock. He probably thought it was just an oversight on God's part. Oh, God probably didn't know what he was talking about, right? The second thing was that Saul assumed that God wouldn't mind if he spared Agag, the king. I mean, he wanted him basically as a trophy, right? He wants this guy as a trophy. Well, guess what? Saul assumed wrong. God had said, utterly destroy everything. And by everything, he means everything. And by everything, he means not nothing. Right? Or not something. Like Agag. Or livestock. It's awfully easy at this point to try to vindicate Saul here by thinking, well, he almost did everything God said he would do, right? I mean, he did most of it. But dear friends, the truth of the matter is that partial obedience, listen to this, partial obedience is disobedience. Have you ever thought about that? In fact, it is complete disobedience. It would seem that some animals have more loyalty to their masters than many of God's children. How we admire the obedience of a dog. Who has dogs out here? I don't know about you, but generally speaking, my dog will obey me much better than my children. There's a gentleman by the name of Archibald Rutledge. He wrote one day that he met a man whose dog had just been killed in a forest fire. Heartbroken, the man explained to Rutledge how it happened. Because this man often worked outdoors, he would take his dog with him. That morning he left the animal in a clearing, and he said to the animal, I command you to stay here. So he tells the dog to stay. He wanted the dog to watch his lunch and in the middle of this forest, okay? This faithful friend, this dog of his, understood, and that is exactly what he did. But then a fire started in the woods, and soon after the blaze spread to the spot where the dog had been left. But the dog didn't move. He stayed right where he was in perfect obedience with his master's word. And with tearful eyes, the dog owner said, I always had to be careful what I told him to do because I knew he would do it. Saul never completed the task that God gave him to do. He only killed the Amalekites in this particular city, excluding Agag the king. He did not destroy them as God had commanded. And then the last of the Amalekites were not destroyed until the days of Hezekiah by a group of Simeonites. We see that in 1 Chronicles chapter 4. We will see later that this was one of the gravest mistakes that Saul could have made. What happens next? Saul's next problem is his denial. And guess what God does? He expresses his displeasure. 1 Samuel 15:10. Then the word of the Lord came to Samuel. I regret that I made Saul king, for he has turned away from following me and has not carried out my instructions. So Samuel became angry and cried out to the Lord all night. Now the term here that is used, regret, is a little bit misleading. In fact, this term does not mean that God regretted his action of having permitted Saul to become king. That idea would imply some sort of imperfection on the part of God, which we know is really not possible. But God knew what was in Saul. He knew what Saul would do. So Saul's rebellion was no surprise to God. The second thing to note is that God's promises and threats are often conditional. Jeremiah 18:8-10 is an example. God would have continued to deal with Saul in mercy and grace and blessing had he been obedient. But due to Saul's disobedience and rebellion, God would now be forced to deal with him differently. This was the basic idea behind this term, regret. God's plans and purposes towards Saul would now have to change. So what happens? Samuel confronts Saul because of this blatant disobedience that he has. 1 Samuel 15:13, when Samuel came to him, Saul said, May the Lord bless you, I have carried out the Lord's instructions. And Samuel, probably laughing, Then what is the sound of sheep and cattle that I hear? He says. He says that. What is the sound of sheep? If you carried out the Lord's instructions, why am I hearing barnyard animals? Okay? So what does Saul do here? Saul was trying just a little too hard to cover up this guilty conscience. So an opening statement to Samuel seems totally out of place. He says, May the Lord bless you, I've carried out the Lord's instructions. So then Saul basically, he's denying any wrongdoing, but then what does he do? He goes further, and he doesn't just say, I didn't do anything wrong, but he starts blaming other people about it. 1 Samuel 15:15, Saul answered, Well, but the troops brought them from the Amalekites to spared the best sheep and cattle in order to offer a sacrifice to the Lord your God. But the rest we destroyed. Right, now they're for sacrifice. Right? All of a sudden. Stop! Samuel exclaimed. This is scripture still. Stop! Let me tell you what the Lord said to me last night. Tell me, he replied. Samuel continued, Although you once considered yourself unimportant, have you not become the leader of the tribes of Israel? The Lord anointed you king over Israel, and then sent you on a mission and said, Go and completely destroy the sinful Amalekites. Fight against them until you have annihilated them. So why didn't you obey the Lord? Why did you rush on the plunder and do what is evil in the Lord's sight? But I did obey the Lord, Saul answered. I went on the mission that the Lord gave me. I brought back Agag, king of Amalek, and I completely destroyed the Amalekites. The troops took sheep and cattle from the plunder, the best of what was set apart for destruction, and to sacrifice to the Lord your God at Gilgal. Guys, guess what? When we deny our sin, that doesn't change the facts. You can deny things up and down all the time. Honey, I thought you said you did the dishes like I asked you to. Well, I did. Then what's in the kitchen on the counter? Well, somebody must have ate more food, right? Your sin stinks. So does mine. So does Saul's. In fact, his probably stunk worse because it was cattle. Even though, after 2,000 years, man still operates on this mistaken idea that if we deny something long enough, somehow it's going to change the obvious. If I just pretend like the sheep and cattle aren't there, maybe they'll just disappear.
Wait long enough, they'll die.
Yeah. Well, maybe. That'll really stink then. Let me give you an example here. I think an Indy 500 race car driver illustrates this idea this way. You don't go and look where it happened, said Scott Goodyear, who starts 33rd. Speaking of the race car drivers who have been killed in crashes at the Indianapolis 500. You don't go watch the films on television. You don't deal with it. You pretend it never happened. The speedway operation itself actually encourages this approach. As soon as the track closes, the day of an accident, the crew heads over and they paint over where the car hit the wall. Through the years, a driver has never been pronounced dead at the racetrack. A trip to an Indianapolis Motor Speedway Racing Museum, located inside the 2.5-mile oval, has no memorial of the 40 drivers who have lost their lives there. Nowhere is there even a mention. What are they doing? If I just pretend that didn't happen, didn't really happen, did it? If only that were true. Saul started his explanation of this situation with, they have. They have. Blame shifting is this typical escape maneuver that you and I have all tried before, haven't we? And we use that when we know that we are guilty of something. John Killinger tells about the manager of a minor league baseball team who was so disgusted with his center fielder's performance that he ordered him to the dugout and he actually took center field himself, the manager.
Nice.
The first ball that got hit to center field took a bad hop, hit him right in the mouth. The next one was a high fly ball which he lost in the glare of the sun until it bounced off his forehead. The third was a hard line drive that he charged with outstretched arms. Unfortunately, it flew between his hands and smacked him in the eye. Furious, he runs back to the dugout, grabs his center fielder by the uniform, and he shouted, "You idiot! You've got center field so messed up that even I can't do anything with it."
Got black eyes.
Guys, Saul was the king. He was the king. Think about it. If you're the king, could you prevent someone from taking cattle? Do you just not notice all the cattle following you home? No. Could you have prevented that?
Yeah.
Could you have prevented someone from taking Agag? Yes, you could have, okay? Plain and simple. It was not a matter of inability on Saul's part, but it was simply rebellion. As accurately stated in verse 9, where we are told this, and would not utterly destroy them. He just didn't. He chose not to. He chose not to utterly destroy them. Then Saul suggested that he and his people had disobeyed for a higher purpose. In essence, he said, no, wait, Samuel, you don't understand. You don't understand. We disobeyed God. Listen to this. We disobeyed God so we could give him a special offer. I'm going to disobey. Think about it. I'm going to disobey God to give him something special.
It's okay, Mom. I stole your credit card for Mother's Day present.
Exactly. Yeah. Great example. Katie, you're on illustrations the rest of the night, okay?
That was so good.
This is a lot like some professing Christians of our day who say things like this. They lamely justify, you know what, I'm going to go gambling up at the casino, up at Ho Chunk or something like that, right? I'm going to go up there, and then I'm going to say, you know what, but if I win some money, then I'm going to give it to church. I'm going to steal Ellie's banana, and I'm going to give it to Sarah. We're good, right? Okay? Dear child of God, please remember this. It is never right to do wrong in order to do right. It is never right to do wrong in order to do right. When God says something, that's what He means. He doesn't mean half of it. He doesn't mean plus something. He means exactly what He says. So please take Him at His word for it. In fact, the philosophy of doing evil that good may come of it is a common practice of today's society. Think about this. The alcohol industry, okay, often puts out ads that they say, man, if you buy a 6-pack of Bud Light, if you buy it between this date and this date, then a certain portion of the sales will go to the Special Olympics. They do this. Okay? This is no joke. It's no joke. Or some other worthy cause. Now, here's the deal. That may be a wonderful and a nice gesture. Okay? But that doesn't make the alcohol industry any less despicable or destructive. In fact, it's actually a little more than a ploy to just increase their sales. It encourages more drinking because now, oh, but if I drink more, I'm just helping. Don't you want to see the kids be able to participate at the Special Olympics? I'm going to have this beer tonight, honey. I'm helping the Special Olympics. Saul's backpedaling here. Here's the deal, though. When you see Saul's backpedaling here, it would actually be almost really, really funny, except for the fact that it's so tragic. He begins to talk about, basically he starts talking out of both sides of his mouth, okay? And at one moment he vows, but I've obeyed God, Samuel. I have performed the commandment of the Lord, he says in verse 13. The next, he admits that he has not obeyed God. Verse 21, just 8 verses later. The things which should have been utterly destroyed. He just admitted they should have been destroyed. I obeyed God, but that should have been destroyed. I obeyed God, but that was supposed to be destroyed. But I still obeyed, but it's destroyed. Which is it? Samuel pointed out to Saul that God prefers obedience to offerings. Right? He said, well, I didn't obey because I wanted to give him an offering. Okay? God prefers obedience to offerings. 1 Samuel 15:22. Then Samuel said, does the Lord take pleasure in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as in obeying the Lord? Look, to obey the Lord is better than sacrifice. To pay attention is better than the fat of rams. Now there are two errors in these ideas brought out in Saul's explanation for this disobedience. The first we've already spoken of. I'll do evil that good may come of it. A second idea is summed up as follows. If I do good in one area, then God will overlook the evil in another area. Have you thought about that before? If I do good in this, then maybe God will overlook my sin over here. So if I serve really well at church, if I go to church, if I obey in that way, but then I go home and I treat my brother or sister like garbage, or I go back and I look at pornography, or if I go do something else, then this stuff will just kind of outweigh that or cover it up. Right? That's an error. Saul's thinking seemed to be that since he was going to make offerings and sacrifices to God with some of these spoils, that God should just overlook this disobedience that he had. Some people will send their money to church, but they won't come with it. Others will attend church regularly, but live like the devil throughout the week. Samuel sort of boiled this whole situation down to one major truth. The truth here is rebellion. When you choose to disobey God, it is outright rebellion. Samuel asked Saul, "So why didn't you obey the Lord? Why didn't you rush on the plunder and do what was evil?" Why did you rush on the plunder and do what was evil in the Lord's sight? Verse 19. So then what happens to Saul as we finish this up? 1 Samuel 15:23, we see Saul's downfall. "For rebellion is like the sin of divination, and defiance like the wickedness and idolatry, because you have rejected the word of the Lord. He has rejected you as king." Let's drop down quick to verse 28. "Samuel said to him, 'The Lord has torn the kingship of Israel away from you today, and has given it to your neighbor who is better than you.'" Ouch. Notice the league in which God places self-will and rebellion. God says it is comparable to witchcraft. You understand that? It is comparable to witchcraft. Devil worship. God says it is comparable to idolatry. Why? It's because rebellion and self-will is basically worshiping the idol of yourself. I am worshiping me instead of God because I want to do what I want to do, when I want to do it, and I will do whatever I want to make myself happy. It is placing our own self and our will ahead of God's. So what eventually happened to Saul? Saul's disobedience actually brought about his death. 2 Samuel 1, verse 6. "I happened to be on Mount Gilboa," he replied, "and there was Saul leaning on his spear. At that moment the chariots and cavalry were closing in on him. When he turned around and saw me, he called out to me, so I answered, 'I'm at your service.' He asked me, 'Who are you?' I told him, 'I am an Amalekite.' Then he begged me, 'Stand over me and kill me, for I am mortally wounded, but my life still lingers.' So I stood over him and killed him, because I knew that after he had fallen, he couldn't survive." In 1 Samuel 31, 1 through 6, we're given basically the general details of Saul's demise. We're seeing the predicament that he was in. He tried actually to take his own life. However, his attempt was unsuccessful to the fact that his coat of chainmail actually prevented a complete dispatching of his life. We see that in 2 Samuel 1:9. Now many assume that 2 Samuel 1, 6 through 10 is a contradiction to 1 Samuel 31, 1 through 6. But actually, I think it kind of goes along with it. There's nothing here that indicates that the Amalekite lied. To the contrary, David took him at his word and executed him for having touched God's anointed. What I don't want you to miss is the lesson here being taught by this seemingly insignificant detail, okay? In disobedience to God, Saul spared the Amalekite Agag. Are you following? Okay? In disobedience to God, what person did Saul allow to live? Agag the Amalekite, right? So almost like a ghost from the past, one Amalekite snuffs out Saul's life, although at his own request. Do you get it? The very people who he refused to kill took his life. Do you see the irony? In the same way, the sin that we spare in our own life may be the one thing that carries out our death sentence. If not physically, maybe spiritually. If we harbor sin in our heart as Christians, it will harm us. We must obey the warning of the writer of Hebrews, who said in chapter 12, verse 1, "Let us lay aside every weight and the sin that so easily ensnares us." Get rid of the gorilla. Get rid of the elephant in the room. Obedience is not optional. Saul lived what could be called a trivial life. He lived basically only for a moment, and he lived it for himself. Tim Hansel once said, "One of the greatest tragedies of our modern civilization is that you and I can live a trivial life and get away with it." I agree. that a tragedy like this, to live a trivial, insignificant life. But the truth of the matter is that seldom does anyone actually get away with living a trivial life. The sad thing is that a trivial life often leads to tragedy for the one living it, and also for the ones that they love. How do I say that? Saul's disobedience actually almost brought about future disaster. In Esther chapter 3, verse 1, it says this: "After all this took place, King Ahasuerus honored Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite. He promoted him to rank and gave him a higher position than all the other officials." And we drop down to verse 8. "And Haman said to the king, 'There is a certain people,' that is the Jews, 'scattering abroad and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of thy kingdom. And their laws are diverse from all people, neither keep they the king's laws. Therefore it is not for the king's profit to suffer for them. If it pleases the king, let it be written that they may be destroyed.'" Who knew that the lasting effects of our sin will have on the future? Saul did not destroy the Amalekites as God told him to do, yet years later the Israelites would suffer the results of Saul's sin. Haman is said to be the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite. In other words, he was a descendant. What does Agagite sound like? Oh, go figure, right? In other words, he was a descendant of Agag the Amalekite. Had not God intervened, Haman would have single-handedly exterminated the nation of Israel. Do you get it? Sin is a big deal. Sin that is not put to death in our hearts will likely destroy us, and it has the power to destroy others as well. God told Israel many years before Saul's reign, "I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the father's sin to the third and fourth generations of those who hate me." Exodus 20, verse 5. I want to tell you a story as I close. It's kind of gruesome, but I think it makes a great point. There's a radio guy named Paul Harvey tells a story of how an Eskimo kills a wolf. The account is pretty grisly, yet it offers fresh insight into the consuming and self-destructing nature of sin. The first thing, that an Eskimo coats his knife blade with animal blood, and then he allows it to freeze. Then he adds another layer of blood, and another, until the blade is completely concealed with frozen blood. Next, the hunter fixes his knife to the ground with the blade pointed up. And when the wolf follows his sensitive nose to the source of this scent and discovers this bait, he licks it. And then he tastes the fresh frozen blood, and he begins to lick faster, more and more vigorously, lapping the blade until the keen edge is bare with no more blood on it. Feverishly now, harder and harder, the wolf licks the blade in the Arctic night. So great becomes his craving for blood that the wolf does not notice the razor-sharp sting of the naked blade on his tongue, nor does he recognize the instant at which his insatiable thirst is being satisfied by his own warm blood. His carnivorous appetite just craves more until the dawn, when he finds himself dead in the snow. Guys, it is a fearful thing to realize, listen to this, it is a fearful thing for us to realize that we can be consumed with our own sin. Only God's grace keeps us from the wolf's fate. It is only by God's grace. Guys, I've been hearing a lot about something recently that I just want to mention, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. How many of you heard about the Netflix TV show 13 Reasons Why? People talking about it a lot at school?
It was like a week ago.
Maybe not at your school, Carson.
They gave me 13 reasons why they were going to watch 13 Reasons Why.
Okay.
They weren't exactly persuasive.
Okay. Here's the deal. There is nothing God-glorifying about that show. In fact, it is a very dangerous show. If you haven't heard anything about it, essentially what it's about a young lady, high schooler, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. I have not watched it, by the way, and I don't intend to, and I don't think that it's, even as an adult, I don't think it's worth even looking at. So if you're curious, please don't watch it. But it's basically 13 reasons why, if I'm not mistaken, that this young lady takes her own life. And at the very end of it, it shows a very grisly depiction of her actually taking her own life. Uncensored. There's no good that comes with that, friends. I don't care what your curiosity level is, but there are very real people in your school, in your life, maybe even people in this room, that battle with depression, that battle with mental illness, that battle with struggle with cutting and with thoughts of suicide and things like that. And guys, the way that this show works is it glorifies it. It makes it look like that this is a beautiful end or a way to get back at all the people who have harmed them. When really the reality is that they're not getting back at anybody. They're being consumed by their own sin. My plea to you is to encourage you not to watch it and not to let your friends watch it. If you've started, please stop. If you have questions about it, please talk to me about it. My fear is the same fear as many. In fact, I've heard that schools have actually issued statements out to parents about this show. That's unheard of, by the way. That's how dangerous this show is. There are portrayals of very terrible things, including rape, other sexual types of things, including what I mentioned about the actual taking of one's life. Please just listen, and please take my advice on this. It is not worth it. It can take you down a very dark path. It's not really all that different than the wolf's fate. Use good discernment. It shouldn't be taken lightly, and there are many deep-rooted evils and sins portrayed. I want you to ask yourself, if you have chosen to watch it, why are you watching it? Don't be consumed by your own lust for violence, for emotional connections, or other types of worldly desires, because it says in Philippians 4, verse 8, "Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any moral excellence, if there is any praise, dwell on these things." When I was in high school, one of the closest people in my life tried to take their life. I don't tell many people that. But the reality is that this whole idea of this show really scares me. And I think that it's really important that you guys avoid it. I cannot say that enough. Because sin is serious to God. In fact, sin is what caused the death of Jesus Christ, God's one and only Son. It caused that death in order to purchase your salvation and mine. It also happened for our forgiveness. Sin should be no less serious for us as saints, for obedience is not something that is optional. Let's pray. Father God, thank you for being so clear in your word and showing us an example through Saul, King Saul. Father, that disobedience is a big deal. God, I pray that our fates would be different than Saul's. May we run to you in obedience. And Father, if we have messed up, if we have screwed up, I pray that we would run to you. That we would not try to run away as Saul did. That we would not try to hide the voice of the cattle. That we would not try to hide King Agag in our lives, whatever he might look like in our lives. But instead, Father, that we would come running to you knowing that you are ready with open arms to give us the forgiveness and the chance at new life that we so desire and that we so need. Father, I pray that we would make this personal tonight and that we would recognize the sin in our lives for what it is. Disobedience to God. Even those of us who are obeying in 99% of things, but we're hanging on to that one thing that we want control of, that is still complete disobedience. Help us to hand that over to you tonight. And God, we thank you that you don't leave us to try to get rid of our sin on our own, but that you have sent Christ for us in your loving grace and compassion. And we pray that we would accept the gift of our salvation through his death and resurrection. It's in your Son's name we pray. Amen.